So let's review. On Daf Mem Vav Amud Beis, we learned the machlokes regarding the principle of hayil. In the case of ha'efa mi Yom Tov l'chol, one who bakes on Yom Tov for the purpose of the weekdays. Rav Chizda Amar loika lo yamrinan hayil. He gets malchus because Rav Chizda does not subscribe to the principle of hayil. Rabba Amar eina loika amrinan hayil. He does not get malchus because Rabba does subscribe to the principle of hayil mikli archem chazilei. Since if many guests would arrive unexpectedly on Yom Tov, he would need the food for Yom Tov. We can view this baking as being done for Yom Tov. Our shir began with Amar Rami Bar Chama. Hadar Rav Chizda v'Rabba, Machlekes Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Shuhi. Rambam Chama wants to link the Machlekes Amiram of Rav Chizda v'Rabba with the Machlekes Tanoim of Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Shua in our Mishnah on Daf Mem Vav about baking tamei bread before Hafrashas Challah on Pesach. It must be first pointed out that with several loaves of baked bread, people will usually separate one loaf as challah, which is more convenient, rather than separate a small piece from each loaf. This creates a problem on Yom Tov. It should be usher to bake all these loaves because among them is the loaf which will potentially become challah tameya and not be eaten, making it shaloi l'tzarech echel nefesh. However, if he will separate a small piece from each loaf, it would be mutter because each loaf is baked l'tzarech echel nefesh. Now we can explain the machlekes as follows. Rabbi Eliezer savar amrinan hayil. Rabbi Eliezer allows baking all the loaves in Yom Tov based on hayil. Since Hafrashas Challah could theoretically be done from each loaf individually, which would justify baking each loaf on Yom Tov. Rabbi Yeshua savar lo yamin hayil. Rabbi Yeshua does not allow baking the bread before Hafrashas Challah because he will separate one loaf and it will turn out that he baked that loaf shaloi l'tzarech echel nefesh. The Gemara rejects the linking of the two machlekes. Rav Papa says perhaps Rabbi Eliezer does not rely on hayil, but allows baking all the loaves because at the time of baking, we don't know which one will be challah, and each loaf is potentially edible. Rav Shesha Ber Davidi says, perhaps Rabbi Yeshua only rejects hayil in our Mishnah, where nobody will be allowed to eat the loaf that is challah tameya. But in the case of baking extra on Yom Tov, he would say hayil because the guests can eat it. The Brisa continues, V'kama shir isa, what is the maximum amount of dough a person can make on Pesach without having to worry about it becoming chametz? Rabbi Shmuel ben Yeshua ben Bereka says, Bechitin, wheat flour, 2 kavan, B'sa'ir, barley flour, 3 kavan. Rabbi Nassim Mishum Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Chiluf hadvarim, the opposite. Bechitin, wheat flour, 3 kavan, B'sa'ir, barley flour, 2 kavan. The machlekes is whether wheat or barley flour leavens more quickly, and therefore we must make a smaller amount at a time. Rav paskins that the maximum amount of dough we can make is the equivalent of the amount of dough that is chayiv in challah. For the details of the shir challah, see our review of Erev and Daf Pei Gimel. Rav Yosef supported the minhag that women should bake only 3/4 of a kav at a time. This was not a chumr de asil de kula in having them make such small amounts of dough that they would avoid the chiyuv of challah, because he holds like Rabbi Eliezer that hasal mitzarfen l'challah. Even if bread is baked separately, when it is put in the same basket after being baked, the basket combines them to make a shir challah. Rabbi Yirmiyah asks if a flat rimless kli would combine the different loaves to make a shir challah and leaves it as a tekui unresolved. Zok the Mishnah. In the case where 3 women are baking together and sharing one small oven that can only fit one batch of dough at one time. Rabbi Gamliel Omer, Shalish nashim lashes ka'achas v'oifis betaner echad zu achar zu. They can all begin kneading at the same time and take turns baking. We're not concerned that the third batch might become chametz while the first 2 are baking. The Mishnah adds, Tafach tiltosh b'tzainin. If she notices the dough beginning to rise, she should put her hands in cold water and pat it on the dough to keep it from leavening. V'chacham ma'imrim achas lasha v'achas eireches v'achas eifa. They should work in a staggered order. As the Gemara explains, there are 3 steps which each take approximately the same amount of time: kneading, shaping, and baking. Therefore, one woman first kneads her dough. Then when she is ready to begin the next step of shaping her dough into loaves, the second woman begins to knead. The next step is what the Chacham are describing in the Mishnah, achas lasha, v'achas eireches, v'achas eifa. The third is kneading, while the second is shaping, while the first is baking. This way, since they are constantly working the dough, it will not become chametz. The Mishnah continues. As the Gemara explains, Rabbi Kiva asked Rabbi Gamliel whether he allows waiting in all circumstances. After all, there are variables, such as women who work quicker or slower, dry or moist wood, hot or cool oven? He answered, yes, indeed. Ein lacha elama sheshana chacham. We must follow the ruling as taught by the Chachamim without qualification. Zak the Mishnah, Sir yisarif va'oichle pater. Dough at the stage of sear should be burned, but one who eats it is not chayav karas. Siduk yisarif va'oichle chayav karas. Dough at the stage of siduk should be burned, and one who eats it is chayav karas, as the Gemara explains. There are actually 3 stages in the chimutz of dough. Hichsifu panav, the surface of the dough turns white like the complexion of a person who is scared. Kikarne chagavim, tiny unconnected cracks like the antenna of grasshoppers start to appear on the surface of the dough. Siduk, shenisarvu sedakim zebezeh, the cracks spread and intersect. Rabbi Yehuda holds that hichsifu panav is considered matzah and not chametz at all. Kikarne chagavim is what the Mishnah refers to as seer, which is chametz nuksha. Siduk is chametz gamer. Meir holds that hichsifu panav is what the Mishnah refers to as seer, which is chametz nuksha. Kikarne chagavim is what the Mishnah refers to as siduk and as chametz gamer. Siduk is of course chametz gamer. Rav explains the reasoning of Meir as Ein lecha kol sedek v'sedek milmala she'ein lekama sedakim milmata. For every one of the karne chagavim on the surface, there are lots of siduk on the inside. There is another machlekes in this Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda holds that chametz noikshe is not asam d'oraisa, as he says va'oichle pater. The chacham of our Mishnah, which are Meir, hold like the Mishnah at the beginning of the parak, harei elu ba'azhara ve'ein behem mishum karas. Chametz noikshe is a lav d'oraisa.